Welcome back to Grace, Grit, and Grounds. Grab a cup of coffee, pull up a stool if you've got one, and spend a little time with me here out in the shop. I've got 3 bowl blanks sitting on the bench today. 2 of them are cedar cut from the logs a friend generously gave to me a while back. The third is olive wood. I've been waiting and wanting to turn this piece for a while now. Truth be told, though, I keep talking myself out of it. It's the only olive blank I have, and olive isn't cheap. Once you put it on the lathe, there's no going back. Every cut removes possibilities until eventually you're left with whatever the wood was always going to become. And I think today, cedar is going to win. I chose a beautiful blank. There are a few rough spots around the edges, and I can already see a little bit of rot that I'm going to have to work around. Nothing unusual. That's often how life comes to us. Rarely perfect, usually carrying a few surprises just beneath the surface. As I mounted the blank on the worm screw, I reached for the on switch of the lathe. I realized something. I've been asking questions lately, a lot of them. Not really theological questions, not scientific questions, just, questions. The kind that quietly settle into your mind when you're driving home after sunset or sitting on a porch with a cup of coffee or even standing in a woodshop while cedar shavings gather around your feet. Questions about why we're here. Questions about whether our lives matter. Questions about what it means to be significant in a universe so unimaginably vast that our minds can barely begin to comprehend it. I'm not asking for easy answers today. If anything, I've become a little suspicious of people who seem to have one for everything. The older I get, the more I discover that wisdom often sounds less like certainty and more like curiosity. Maybe that's why I found myself listening to people I normally disagree with. One of those people has been Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, before anyone starts writing the comment I know is coming, let me just say this. I do disagree with him on some important things. We don't arrive at the same conclusions about God or creation or even the nature of reality, but disagreement doesn't mean someone has nothing to teach us. One thing I genuinely admire about him is his willingness to simply say, I don't know. That shouldn't be remarkable, but somehow it is. In a world where everyone feels pressured to have an opinion about everything, there's something refreshing about intellectual humility. Tyson was talking about dark matter and dark energy, and he made the comment that stuck with me. He said he almost wished they hadn't given them those names because at the end of the day, we really don't know what they are. He joked that we might as well have called them Fred or maybe Chuck or something. I laughed. But the more I thought about it, the more profound it became. Human beings have always named things. Children named their stuffed animals, sailors named stars, explorers named rivers and mountains and such. Scientists named particles, forces, galaxies. We do it because naming helps us to relate to the world around us. A name gives us something to hold on to. It lets us point to something mysterious and begin to have a conversation. But sometimes we confuse naming something with understanding it. Just because we've given something a label doesn't mean we've uncovered its nature. Maybe we've only admitted that we know enough to recognize it's there. I couldn't help but think about the opening pages of Genesis. One of Adam's earliest jobs was to name the animals. I've always loved that scene. It wasn't about Adam exercising control so much as it was participating with God in discovering creation. Naming became part of relationship. Maybe we've been doing the same thing ever since. We look into the heavens and discover something we can't explain. We give it a name and keep asking questions. Honestly, I think it's a beautiful thing. Not because we figured out the universe, but because, we're still humble enough to admit that we haven't. Once the cedar begins to turn into round, the work starts to become easier. I can tell that the corners are disappearing. Well, they disappear first, but they also are disappearing pretty fast. Then the roughness, and little by little, the shape that had been hiding inside this blank started to emerge. I've always liked this part of the turning. At the beginning, the wood is mostly a possibility. You can imagine a dozen different forms inside it, but every time the tool touches the grain, one of those possibilities disappears. The bowl becomes clearer because everything it is not begins to fall away. There may be something in that worth talking about. As I continued to shape the outside, I found myself returning to questions I've been asking most of my life. I don't remember a time when I wasn't curious. Even as a child, I had what I can only describe to be as an incurable need to know. I wanted to understand how things worked, why people behaved the way they did, why the stars were there, where everything came from, and what any of it really meant. I asked questions that probably exhausted my parents. To be honest, I still kind of do exhaust the people around me with my questions. I understand that. I've accepted it. That need to know may be one of the things that ultimately led me to God. I never found faith by deciding that questions didn't matter. Just the opposite. I found faith because the questions mattered too much for me to ignore. Even now, after years of studying theology and reading scripture, preaching sermons, and walking with people through some of their deepest and sometimes even the darkest moments in their life, there is still so much I don't understand. I've learned enough to know just how very little I do know. That can be unsettling when you're younger. You imagine that one day you'll arrive at a place where everything fits together. The questions will stop and the fog will lift. All those loose ends will tie themselves into neat little knots. Then you get older and realize, well, the mystery of the universe and life itself only grows. Every answer seems to open another door. Every discovery reveals another room. Every time you think you've reached the edge of understanding, the horizon moves a little further away. I've made peace with that personally. There are questions I may never have answered in this life. There are mysteries that I may carry with me all the way into glory. And maybe when I stand in the presence of God, some of those questions will seem incredibly important. Maybe others will seem almost silly. I suspect there may be a few things I've spent years trying to understand that will suddenly make me laugh out loud. But I'm okay with not knowing everything now. Faith has not removed my questions. It has simply given me a place to bring them. I believe God is big enough to handle them. These are not questions of someone looking for a reason to walk away from God. They're questions of someone who has fallen in love with both the Creator and His creation. I ask because I care. I wonder because the universe is wonderful. I keep looking because everything around me seems to whisper that there is more here than I can presently see. As the bowl continues to take shape beneath the tool, I find myself thinking about scale. Scale is one of those things the human mind has trouble holding on to. We live on Earth, which feels enormous when you're standing on it. There are oceans we cannot see across, mountains that rise above the clouds, deserts that stretch beyond the horizon, and places no human being has ever touched. From where we stand, the Earth seems almost impossibly large. And then we step back. Earth is just one planet, orbiting one star. That star is one among billions in the Milky Way. The Milky Way is only one galaxy among many that we call the local group. This group of galaxies is part of something larger still. Beyond that are clusters and then superclusters of galaxies, vast filaments of galaxies, and enormous spaces between them that seem almost completely empty. And then there is the observable universe, the portion of creation from which light has had enough time to reach us. And even that word observable quietly admits our limitation. It tells us only what we can presently see. It does not tell us what else may be there. The further out we look, the smaller we become. Our planet becomes a speck. Our solar system becomes nearly invisible. Our entire galaxy becomes one faint point among countless others. And somewhere inside all of that, on one small planet, orbiting an ordinary tiny little star, a man is standing outside a garage turning a cedar bowl. You can almost hear the universe laughing. I remember a cartoon I watched as a kid, the Animaniacs, which had surprisingly a lot of really good, intelligent things to talk about. They once sang a song that was just absolutely magnificent about our place in the universe. And they talked about that we were just tiny little specks about the size of Mickey Rooney, which is funny if you know who Mickey Rooney was. It's even funnier if you realize most people now have to look him up. But the joke works because it touches something true. We are small. In terms of physical scale, we're almost unbelievably minuscule. Some people look at the vastness and conclude that nothing matters. If humanity occupies such a tiny corner of such an enormous universe, then surely our lives must be insignificant. Surely our joys and griefs and our prayers and our families and our little projects in the garage are nothing more than brief sparks in an endless, dark universe. I understand how someone gets there, but when I look at that same universe, I find myself asking a different question. Why would a God capable of creating something this enormous care about little cedar bowls? Why would he care about scraped knuckles, unfinished projects, grandkids running through the house? Why would he care about old pastors asking questions in their garage? Why would he care about me? That question has been sitting with me for a long time. It's not really a question about astronomy or anything like that. I think it's ultimately a question about significance. I think that is the question beneath many of our questions. Where do I fit? What is my place? Do I matter? Does my life carry any weight beyond the small circle I occupy? We ask those questions in our marriages. We ask them in our families. We ask them in our churches, our jobs, our communities, and our friendships. Sometimes we try to enlarge our place. Sometimes we try to protect it. Sometimes we become threatened when someone else enters into that space. We measure our significance by the size of our influence, the number of people who know our names, and the work we accomplish or the space we occupy in someone else's life. But the universe makes all those measurements look rather small. No matter how important a person becomes, they are still standing on the same tiny, little, insignificant planet as the rest of us. No matter how many people know your name, there are billions who never will. No matter how large your work becomes, the stars continue to burn without consulting you. That could make us feel meaningless. Or it could invite us to reconsider how meaning is measured. Maybe significance was never about size. Maybe it was never about becoming large enough for the universe to notice us. Maybe the deeper question is whether we are known. That is where my mind keeps returning to the opening of the Gospel of John. John begins with words that feel almost too large for language. He says words like, "In the beginning was the Word." He reaches backward beyond Bethlehem, beyond Abraham, beyond Eden, beyond the first light, and tells us that before creation began, Christ already was. Then John makes an astonishing claim. Everything that came into being did so through him. Everything did that. The stars, the galaxies, the cedar spinning on the lathe right now, the atoms inside the cedar, the laws that hold those atoms together, the light entering my eyes, the breath moving through my lungs. John wasn't writing a science textbook. He was not trying to describe the mechanics of the cosmic expansion or explain how matter was formed after the beginning of the universe. He was simply making a claim about meaning. Creation has a source. Creation has order. Creation has a relationship to the Word. I don't know how much John understood about the physical scale of the universe. I mean, certainly he could look into the night sky, and more than likely he saw more of the stars than we can see now because of modern light pollution. He did not know about galaxies, superclusters, dark matter, or the unimaginable distances modern astronomy has revealed. I also don't pretend to know everything about the Holy Spirit and what he intended us to understand through every phrase John wrote. There are depths in those words I have not yet reached. There may be depths no human mind can fully reach, but I do hear what John is saying. Everything came through Christ. Everything holds some relationship to him. And if that is true, then creation is not merely a collection of particles drifting through emptiness. It is spoken, it is sustained, and it is known. And perhaps that includes me. Perhaps my existence is not accidental. Perhaps my life does not gain significance because I managed to make myself large. Perhaps I matter because the one through whom the galaxies came into being knows that I am here. I don't know if I can explain that any better. I'm not sure it's something meant to be explained as much as received. So I keep shaping the cedar. The curve is becoming more defined, the opening is narrowed, the grain begins to reveal the patterns that have been hidden inside the blank for years. And for a little while, I simply let that question remain. What does it mean to be small in a universe created by a God who sees you? There is one thing about turning bowls that I love. When everything is going well, time almost seems to disappear. The rhythm of the lathe settles in. The sounds become familiar. The tool begins to feel like an extension of my hands. And then my mind wanders. But at the same time, my attention stays exactly where it needs to be. It's a strange combination of concentration and freedom. That afternoon, my thoughts were somewhere out among the galaxies. And I was thinking about the size of the universe, about questions, about things that probably won't ever be answered in my lifetime, about dimensions I can only begin to imagine, about John writing that everything came into existence through Christ, about how incredibly small I am, and then a crack. It's funny how life does that. One minute you're contemplating the mysteries of the cosmos, and the next minute you're staring at a split in a cedar bowl. I suppose the universe has a way of reminding us that we still live on Earth. I stopped the lathe, and the bowl was where I wanted it. The shape felt right. The curve had settled into that simple form. It always seemed to come back to that. The inside was mostly finished, but there really wasn't any more cutting to do. But there it was, a crack running through the grain. It's not catastrophic, not enough to ruin the bowl, but it's enough to demand my attention. Sometimes life interrupts our biggest questions with smaller ones that refuse to be ignored. The bill that needs to be paid, the dishes that still need to be washed, that doctor's appointment that still has to be kept, or a child that simply needs a hug. We may be wondering about eternity, but the wood in front of us still has a crack in it. So I reach for the thin CA glue. That's the super glue that I use. And if you've never used it, it's almost like water. It finds its way into places your eyes can barely see. And I worked it into the crack from both sides of the bowl, hoping that gravity would help carry it deep in enough to stabilize the wood. And then I packed in some cedar dust. It seemed like the right thing to do. Wood helping wood. I waited a few minutes, then I started sanding. Unfortunately, the crack was still there. I tried again, more glue, more dust, more sanding, still no changes. Now, if I'm honest, this is usually the point where frustration starts whispering. Not shouting, just whispering, maybe I've pushed this bowl too far. Maybe I should have chosen the other blank. Maybe I missed something earlier. Maybe I've wasted my afternoon. Those whispers don't just stay in the wood shop, unfortunately. They follow me everywhere. I'm sure they do the same to you. Maybe those whispers say things like, you should have taken that job. You shouldn't have said that. You've missed your opportunity. Maybe it's too late now. Failure has a remarkably familiar vocabulary. I stood there for a minute looking at that bowl and realizing something. Continuing wasn't accomplishing anything. I wasn't making progress anymore. I was just repeating myself. I think one of the hardest disciplines in life is recognize the difference between persistence and stubbornness. We celebrate perseverance, and rightly so. Scripture certainly does. But not every pause is quitting. Sometimes wisdom sounds like, that's enough for right now. Sometimes faith says, tomorrow is still in God's hands. So I filled the crack one more time, and I worked the glue as deep into the grain, pressed in some more cedar dust, and I left the bowl on the lathe and I walked away. Not because I'd given up, but because I'd finally realized I couldn't force the process. Some things simply need time. That's true of glue. It's also true of people. Healing has its own pace. Trust has its own pace. Grief and growth also has its own pace. I've spent enough years in ministry to know you can't rush what only time and grace can accomplish. So I left the shop. Funny thing is, I didn't go do anything profound. I didn't open up another theology book. I didn't watch another lecture about cosmology. I didn't search for answers to the mysteries of the universe. I just went to the other side of the house and spent some time with my grandkids. They wanted to play. So we played. We laughed, we chased each other, we noticed bugs, we looked at the clouds. We did all the wonderful, ordinary things that children seem to do without ever realizing they're extraordinary. Some people talk about touching grass these days, usually as a joke, meaning that you've spent too much time inside your own head. Maybe they're onto something. There are times when the healthiest thing you can do is step away from a problem long enough to remember that life is still unfolding around us. The universe may be unimaginably vast. There may be billions of galaxies beyond anything we'll ever see. There may be mysteries waiting that will occupy scientists for the next 1,000 years. But at that moment, my granddaughter wanted me to see something she had found. Which mattered more? I don't know if that's an easy question to answer. The galaxies didn't become less magnificent because I walked away from thinking about them, and my granddaughter didn't become less important because she occupied only a tiny corner of one little tiny planet. Maybe significance isn't found by comparing sizes. Maybe it's found by giving yourself fully to the moment you've been handed. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do is stop trying to solve the universe and simply be present with the people God has already placed you in front of. A couple hours later, I returned after the sun had begun its slow descent. The little voices that are my grandkids had quieted for the evening, and I wandered back to the shop. The glue had cured and the bowl was waiting. Sometimes tomorrow really is enough. So I turned the lathe back on and I started sanding again. Little by little, the excess glue disappeared, the tool marks faded, the cedar began to glow beneath the sandpaper. Eventually, I reached the crack itself, and structurally it was sound, and I could tell that the bowl was as whole as it was going to be. Visually, unfortunately, not so much. If you know what you're looking for, and even if you don't, you'll probably find it almost immediately. The glue that I had used had soaked into the pores of the cedar, and they had left a faint reminder of what had happened behind. I sanded as much as I dared, but there comes a point when trying to erase a flaw begins to erase the bowl that I was trying to create. So I stopped and I accepted it. Oddly enough, I think that's true of people too. Some things heal, some things always leave evidence. Grace doesn't always erase the scars. Sometimes it simply keeps the scar from spreading. Maybe that's enough. Maybe healing isn't pretending the wound never happened. Maybe healing is discovering that what once threatened to break us no longer has the power to define us. As I rubbed the finish onto the cedar bowl, the grain came alive, and it came alive one last time. The reds deepened, the golds emerged. The swirls I've been watching all afternoon seemed to almost dance beneath the light. Even the repaired place became part of the story. It wasn't hidden, and I'm not celebrating it. It's just simply included in the whole story. And somehow that feels honest. I've spent most of this afternoon thinking about galaxies and dark matter and clusters and superclusters of galaxies and questions that have occupied philosophers and theologians and scientists for generations. The funny thing is, though, I still don't understand dark matter. I still don't understand the dimensions beyond the ones I can experience. I don't understand eternity. I don't fully understand what it means that Christ sustains it all. I certainly don't understand why God, who spoke galaxies into existence, would choose to love people like me. Those questions remain. But I don't find them threatening anymore. I've come to believe that wonder is healthier than certainty pretending to be knowledge. There is a confidence that comes from knowing. There is another kind of confidence that comes from just simply trusting. The first says, I have all the answers. The second says, I don't know, but I do know the one who does. Perhaps faith was never meant to eliminate every question. Perhaps faith is trusting the one who holds the answers while having the humility to admit that we don't. I think that's a healthier way to live. not with less curiosity, but with deeper confidence. You see, curiosity keeps asking, faith keeps walking. The two have become, in my life, good companions. Well, the bowl is finished, and I have to admit I'm pretty pleased with it. It isn't perfect, and there's a repaired crack that pretty much anyone looking at it will see. And maybe that's fitting, because this bowl tells the truth. It's funny to think about that. This little cedar bowl will probably outlive me. Long after I'm gone, someone may place a small bit of fruit in it, or drop keys at the end of a long day. Maybe it'll sit on the shelf, holding nothing at all except a little dust that's collected there and whatever memories it has made. I don't know. Just like I don't know what dark matter really is. I don't know if one day we'll discover dimensions that we've never imagined. I don't know how large creation truly is beyond what we can perceive. But I do know this. The same God who painted galaxies also imagined cedar grain. The same God who stretched out the heavens has numbered my days. The same God who knows the stars by name knows mine. And if that's true, then maybe significance was never about becoming larger, bolder, or bigger. Maybe it has always been about belonging to someone infinitely greater than ourselves. I think that's enough wondering for one bowl. If these conversations encourage you, I'd love to invite you to become part of this little community we're building here at Grace, Grit, and Grounds. We're just over 250 friends gathering around a workbench with a cup of coffee in ordinary moments where God so often meets us. If that's the kind of conversation you like to keep having, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe. Maybe even leave a comment below. I read every one of them, and I do my best to respond because some of the most beautiful and meaningful conversations happen after my cameras stop rolling. As always, thank you for spending time out here in the shop with me. Until next time, keep looking for grace in the ordinary. Keep putting your hands to good work. Keep asking honest questions. After all, grace builds what grit sustains. I'll see you in the next one.